Welcome to day 8 with Storytime with Nanny. Now we are still reading in Treasury of Virtues. Remember I told you it was going to take a long time. I think we're going to wrap it up today in this book though. And we should have enough time for about 4 stories, I believe. We'll see. We're going to start with the tortoise and the hare. Now the tortoise is what we call a turtle, most of us do, and the hare is what we call a rabbit or a bunny. And it's a tale of perseverance, and it's illustrated by Krista Brockman-Towns. Other illustrations are by Marty Noble, and it's adapted by Mary Rowitz. One day, a fast hare hopped into the path of a slow tortoise. "It must be awful to be so slow," said the hare. "Fast is the only way to go." The tortoise slowly shook his head. "Fast is your style, but slow and steady gets me where I want to go." As long as you are in no hurry," said the hare. "If you were ever in a race, you would surely lose." The tortoise shook his head again. "Don't be so sure. I have won a few races. Perhaps I could win another today." "Are you saying you want to race me?" asked the hare. The tortoise nodded yes, as quickly as he possibly could, which was not very quick at all. "Okay then, let's race," said the hare. "But you'll never win." "We'll see," said the tortoise. "Slow and steady wins the race." News of the race spread quickly. Friends of the hare and the tortoise gathered to watch. Nobody understood why the slow tortoise would race the fast hare. "The tortoise doesn't stand a chance," the fox said. "Even when he runs, it looks like he is standing still." "The hare is the fastest animal around," said the squirrel. The tortoise didn't listen to what the other animals said. He kept saying to himself, "Slow and steady wins the race." The hare heard the tortoise and chuckled. "Slow and steady? Let me tell you, I could slowly and steadily eat 4 bushels of carrots and still beat you to the finish line." "Race along the dirt path," said the fox. "We will take a shortcut and meet you at the finish line." Then the squirrel waved a red flag to start the race. They were off. The hare sprinted off to a very fast start. He kicked up dirt into the tortoise's eyes. "See you later, Slowpoke," the hare said, laughing. The tortoise did not mind that the hare was teasing him. "I'll have the last laugh," the tortoise said to himself. "The hare is in fine form today," said the fox. "Just look how fast he's going." "And look at the tortoise," the squirrel said. "He has hardly moved at all." The tortoise didn't listen to what the others were saying. He focused only on the dirt path ahead of him, and slowly but steadily he kept moving. The tortoise would not stop even for a moment. "Slow and steady wins the race," the tortoise kept repeating to himself. "Slow and steady wins the race." The hare got very fast, very far, very fast. He was so far ahead that when he looked back, he couldn't even see the tortoise anymore. The hare stopped running to take a break. He was already huffing and puffing. Then he began to yawn. The tired hare wondered why he was in such a hurry to reach the finish line. He decided to take a short nap alongside the road. "I could sleep for hours and that slowpoke still would not catch up to me," the hare said. "And even if he did, I surely would wake up as he walked by." The hare fell fast asleep along the side of the race course. Hours later, the tortoise finally caught up with him. As he got closer to the sleeping hare, the tortoise could hear his snoring. He seemed to be in a very deep sleep, but the tortoise didn't want to take any chances. Very carefully, the tortoise walked past the hare on his tiptoes. He moved extra slowly and extra quietly so he would not wake up the hare as he walked by. The tortoise smiled with pride when he passed the hare. "Slow and steady wins the race," he whispered as he headed toward the finish line. Slow and steady wins the race. As the tortoise looked down the dirt path, he could see everyone was gathered at the finish line. The tortoise could hardly wait to see their looks when he crossed the line first. When the hare finally woke up, he saw a trail of tortoise prints. He leaped to his feet and looked ahead to the finish line. The tortoise was just about to win the race. The hare ran down the path as fast as he could, but it was too late. The slow and steady tortoise had already won. The tortoise looked very pleased with himself. It was not every day that he beat a fast hare in a race. The hare felt foolish that he had lost to the tortoise, and he was very tired from running so fast at the end of the race. He fell to the ground to catch his breath. The fox let out a long whistle. "Tell me," he said to the tortoise, "how did you beat the fast hare?" "It's like I always said, slow and steady wins the race. One to grow on." And it's about perseverance. That means never giving up. Early in the race, it would have been easy for the tortoise to quit the hare. The hare was winning by so much that it looked like the tortoise could never catch up. Even though everyone laughed at the tortoise and no one thought he had a chance of winning, he kept going. The tortoise showed the other animals that anything is possible with a little perseverance. Remember what that means? That we don't give up. As you grow, you will learn that things don't always come easily. Sometimes we have to work a little harder to be good at something. But as the tortoise shows us, wonderful things can happen when you don't give up. And I think about that, and I think about how the tortoise had to believe in himself even though no one else did. And he kept saying good words about himself. And he ended up winning. So it's always in our best interest to have a good attitude and to think that we can accomplish something and to keep trying. This next story is The Little Dutch Boy, and I remember this one when I was younger. It's a tale of perseverance as well, and it's illustrated by Linda Docky Graves, and it's adapted by Sarah Toast. Long ago, there was a boy named Hans who lived with his mother in a pretty town in Holland. The land of Holland is very flat, and much of it is below the level of the sea. The farmers there built big walls called dikes to keep the sea from flooding their farms. Hans and the other children knew that if a dike broke, the fields and towns would be ruined. One day, Hans' mother packed a basket of fruit, bread, and cheese for Hans to take to their old friend Mr. Van Noten. Mr. Van Noten lived outside of town, and it was a long way to his house. As Hans set out, his mother told him to not stay too late. She wanted him to be home before dark. Mr. Van Noten had only an old dog to keep him company, so he was very happy when Hans came to visit him. To get to Mr. Van Noten's home, Hans just followed the main road out of town. The road ran right alongside the dike. Hans was very thirsty and hungry after his long walk, so Mr. Van Noten made cocoa and set out the bread and cheese. After their meal, the boy and the old man talked by the fire. Hans enjoyed Mr. Van Noten's stories of the olden days. When Mr. Van Noten's dog scratched at the door to be let out, Hans noticed that the sky had become dark and stormy. He decided that he should leave right away to get home before it started to rain. Hans said goodbye to Mr. Van Noten and promised to come back soon. Hans walked quickly, but he was not even halfway home when the air became much colder and the wind began to blow very hard. It wasn't long before cold, stinging raindrops battered Hans as he struggled against the powerful wind. The weather made it difficult for Hans to walk, but he kept going. "If I just keep putting one foot in front of the other," said Hans to himself, "I'll be home soon." The strong wind made the trees bend low and it flattened the flowers. Hans was getting cold and he had to hold his hat on his head to keep it from blowing away. "I hope my mother isn't upset when I arrive home so wet and cold," he thought. Hans was getting more and more tired with every step, but he had to keep going. He remembered that his mother wanted him home before dark. and Hans did not want to let her down. He wanted to get home, so she would not worry. Hans kept his head down against the wind as he trudged along the road. It was so dark outside that Hans had no idea he was nearing the town until he lifted his head for a moment. Hans was happy to see the dike right in front of him. It meant he would soon be home and out of the rain. Even with all the raindrops falling and dripping from the trees, Hans noticed some water where it shouldn't have been. There was a small hole in the dike, and a trickle of water was seeping through. Hans knew right away what must have happened. The storm had whipped up the waves of the sea on the other side, and the great weight of the pounding water made a crack in the dike. "I've got to warn everybody that the dike has sprung a leak," thought Hans. Hans ran into town. "The dike is breaking," he shouted. "Help, we've got to fix the dike." Shout as he would, no one heard Hans. Nobody else was outside, and all the houses had been completely shut because of the storm. All the doors were secured tightly and bolted, and every window closed and shuttered. Hans soon realized his shouting wasn't doing any good. He stopped running to catch his breath. Leaning against a fence, Hans tried to think of what he should do next. Hans knew his mother must be worrying about him, but he also knew that the tiny hole in the dike was getting bigger every minute. If the hole got big enough, the sea would surely push its way through and break the dike. If the dike broke, all would be lost. The sea would flood the farms and wash away the pretty little town. As fast as he could, Hans ran back to the place where he had seen the water seeping through the dike. Sure enough, the crack was bigger now than when he first had spotted it. Hans knew that the crack must be fixed soon, otherwise the sea would break through and it would be too late. There was nothing else to do, so Hans balled up his fist and pushed it into the hole to stop the little stream of water. Hans was proud and happy that one small boy could hold back the sea. He was sure that his worried mother would soon send people to look for him, but minutes turned into hours as Hans patiently stood there. As darkness fell, Hans became very cold and tired, and his arm began to ache. He had to force himself to keep standing on his tired legs. To keep himself going, Hans thought about how important it was to hold back the water of the sea. As Hans stood in the cold rain by the dike, he thought about the warmth of the fireplace at home. Then he thought about how good it was going to feel to lie down in his snug bed. These thoughts helped the exhausted boy get through the long night. When Hans didn't come home that evening, his mother began to worry. Even while the rain was falling, she kept looking out the door for Hans to come back. At last she decided that Hans must have waited out the storm at Mr. Van Naughton's. She thought he must have spent the night there because it was too dark to come home after the storm. After looking out the door one more time, Hans' mother closed up the house and went to bed. She couldn't sleep. She was too worried about her little boy. Early the next morning, Mr. Van Naughton was walking to Hans' home. He wanted to thank Hans for the visit and thank his mother for the tasty food. When he came to where Hans was, the little boy was trembling with cold. Hans' arm hurt from the effort of keeping his fist in the hole of the dike, and his legs were ready to collapse from standing all night. Still, Hans had to hold firm for just a little while longer. Mr. Van Naughton ran into town to get help. "Don't worry, Hans," said Mr. Van Naughton. "I'll be back in a jiffy. You're doing a great job. Just hang on a little longer." Soon Mr. Van Naughton returned with someone to take care of Hans and materials to repair the dike. Hans was wrapped in blankets and carried home. He was put to bed and given warm broth to drink. His mother rubbed his fingers and his stiff legs. Word quickly spread through the town of how Hans had held back the sea all by himself. The townspeople were very curious. They went to the dike to see the hole that Hans had bravely kept plugged. As soon as Hans felt strong enough, he and his mother went back to the dike to see the repairs that were being made. Everyone in town was overjoyed to see Hans. They thanked him for holding back the mighty sea and for saving them from what would have otherwise been a terrible flood. The mayor of the town presented Hans with a medal to honor his dedication, and all the townspeople cheered loudly. Hans would forever be remembered as a hero. Years later, even after Hans was all grown up, people still called him the little boy with the big heart. Their one to grow on is about perseverance. It says when Hans discovered a leak in the dike that held back the sea, he knew it had to be stopped. Because he couldn't find help, he plugged up the leak himself and stood his ground for hours and hours. Even though it was dark and cold in the storm, Hans knew that he was the only person who could keep the town from being washed away. That kind of dedication is called perseverance. Perseverance means sticking with something even when it gets difficult. It helps us get through hard times so that we can accomplish great things. And I think about how, even though he was so young, he was able to do a great thing. And he put himself above all his townspeople. And then he finally did get help, didn't he? Because he needed help. And all was saved, and the town was saved because of Hans. So we have to keep ourselves safe, but we can do big things, and we can be a big help. And sometimes even the little things we do are a big help. Now, I know that we should have time for one more, so we may still not get done with this book today. We'll see. This one is called Johnny Appleseed, and it's a tale of love. It's illustrated by Rusty Fletcher, and it's adapted by Jennifer Bodart. There once was a traveler who answered to the name Johnny Appleseed. Everyone knew Johnny. He was born in Boston, Massachusetts, around 1775. When Johnny was 26 years old, he set out to travel all across America. He had collected apple seeds in the East and carried them in a sack slung over his back. As he traveled, Johnny spread the seeds. He often planted many seeds in one area. He would then build a fence around the growing trees to protect them. When settlers came from the East, they would find the apple orchards and feel at home. Now, not all the seeds ended up as trees in an orchard, though. Sometimes they fell by the side of the road. Some of these seeds were eaten by squirrels. Others were washed away by the rain, but sometimes they would start to grow. This is a story about one of those seeds, because it actually makes me think of, it actually turns more into a story about the tree than it does Johnny Appleseed, but Johnny Appleseed is where the story begins. This seed fell from Johnny's pack as he walked away from a tiny village. There were only a few settlers who lived in this village. They had built some cabins and were hoping to live there for a long time. Just outside the village was a happy little stream. The seed landed beside the stream. As luck would have it, the soil there was very good for growing trees. It wasn't long before a tender sapling shot up out of the ground. Soon the sapling started to look more like a tree. The young tree had bark. Before long, the small sapling sprouted a crown of branches tipped with emerald green leaves. It grew in an open spot where there was plenty of sunlight to soak up. With each passing day, the tree seemed to get a little bit stronger. Johnny would have liked the way this new tree was growing. Years passed, and the young sapling grew into a fine tree. Each spring it added a little more bark to its trunk. Each spring also saw more settlers passing by on their way west. The small path became even more worn into the ground from the wagons and people passing by. The tree kept growing. Every year it welcomed the newest additions to the deer and rabbit families who came to visit. The tree's branches soon filled with quick-footed squirrels. Sometimes they nibbled on the apples. A bird family always built a nest in the tree's branches. Even its bark was home to tiny beetles and caterpillars. The tree was glad to have company. Each fall it said goodbye to summer friends who headed south or went underground for winter. Then it let its leaves drop to the ground and settled down for a nice winter's nap. More time passed and the village became a town. The tree continued to grow too. It stood high above the well-worn path, which was now covered with cement. The branches of the tree spread far over the stream. Now the town was always busy. It was filled with houses, factories, and people. Of course, the tree heard a lot more than singing birds and gurgling water from the stream. The town noises mixed in with the other sounds that the tree had always known. Laughter also floated in the air. Many people had chosen the big tree as a favorite place for picnics. Whenever there were children around, they always ended up climbing on the strong limbs. Sometimes they napped in the shade of the tree after an afternoon of play. Unfortunately, with all the people and noise, the deer and rabbits were scared away. The tree missed them, but at least some animals still came to visit. One day a loud rumbling noise woke the tree before the morning dew had dried on the grass. A big machine came and started digging holes in the ground. The tree heard the workers say that the town was booming. The tree wasn't quite sure what that meant. It means it's growing. Soon tall buildings were built. These buildings blocked the sunlight. The town became a city. The smoke from the factories made the tree choke and even turned some of its leaves yellow. The stream did not run past its roots anymore. Cement sidewalks crowded the tree. Soon all that was left was a tiny patch of grass around the tree's trunk. Perhaps worst of all, even the people seemed too busy to notice the tree. This made the tree very sad. Now the tree didn't have any animal friends or any people friends. Its leaves drooped. In a city full of people, the tree was all alone. A really tall building had been built right across the street from the tree. A new family moved into an apartment in the new building. There was a little boy in that family. He was sad because he didn't know anyone to play with. When his mom went to the grocery store, he always asked permission to wait outside. He would step over the fence that surrounded the tree, wrap his arms around the massive trunk, and give the tree a hug. Then he'd climb up the trunk just as fast as a squirrel. This made the tree so happy. It would hold its branches out strong and still so the boy wouldn't slip. The tree would then part its leaves so the boy could see the hills that were beyond the city limits. Sometimes the boy would pretend he was a cowboy riding through those hills. The tree became the boy's favorite place. They spent many happy afternoons together. One afternoon, the boy's mother called him to come in. He did not hear her because he was sleeping in the tree. His mother was very worried. She asked some neighbors to help her look for him. They were all calling and looking for the boy. Then someone looked up and saw the sleeping boy in the branches of the apple tree. They all called to him. The sleepy boy opened his eyes and saw the crowd below. "Come down, young man. You'll get hurt," called his mother. "Don't worry," answered the boy. "This tree is my friend. It watches out for me." An old man chuckled. "It's true," he said. "I napped in this tree when I was a boy." A woman told her story of how she used to picnic under this tree with her true love. Everyone told stories about how they remembered the tree from when they were young. Everyone looked at the tree and its little patch of grass. They all felt very sad because of what they had let happen to the tree. "This tree has been a friend to all of us," said the boy. "It should have a better home." "Let's build a park," said someone from the back of the crowd. The people cheered. In just a few days there was a loud rumbling sound again. The tree wasn't afraid this time. With the help of the big machines, the people were able to safely move the tree to an empty lot nearby. Then, believe it or not, they planted lots of little saplings. The tree, who had only seen others like itself from a distance, was now going to be surrounded by other trees. A neighborhood store owner sent over some benches and swings. Soon people filled the park. Birds filled the trees, and laughter filled the air. The tree was very happy. All of a sudden, the park seemed to change life in and around the neighborhood. It was almost as if people began to walk more slowly. They made time for picnics and playing. Children came and chased butterflies. They climbed in the tree branches. Birds and animals came and visited the trees and nibbled on the apples. The little boy had read about Johnny Appleseed in the books at school. Then he had an idea. "Let's name the park after Johnny Appleseed," he said to the neighbors. The people thought that was a great idea. The little boy continued to visit the tree, even when he was a man with a family of his own. He would sit in the grass and lean against his old friend's trunk. He'd pat the rough bark and smile up at the tree. When he did, the old tree's leaves would rustle and dance, even on the calmest days. Their one to grow on is about love. The little boy reminded the townspeople that everyone and everything needs love. It is especially important to show trees and animals and other wild things extra care because they can't help themselves. In this story, we see the difference love makes to the tree, the boy, and the other people in the city. We also see that when a group of people work together, they can make good things happen. When you're outdoors, pay attention to the world around you. Take time to plant a tree or feed the birds with a friend, in an act of love that everyone will appreciate. And that is all we have time for today, but I did want to tell you what else this story made me think of is long after Johnny Appleseed had gone, his love for other people by planting trees was still here. And this place is trees that my great-grandparents had planted, possibly further back than that because the road's named after my family, but I know my great-grandparents built their home here, and it was already in the family in this area before that, so that's what I think of, and it shades me. I do have even some fruit growing in the back, but I think about, and that's good for me and Wilma and Pepper, my goat and my pig, but I enjoy the shade that the trees give me, and I enjoyed the tree that my grandfather planted for my grandmother. I'm looking at it right now, actually. And so when we do plant trees, or even bushes or flowers, it's an act of love, and it's not only for us to enjoy, but others to enjoy even years and years and years after we're gone. Well, thank you for tuning in again to Storytime with Nanny, and I will see you the next time. You have a great, blessed day.